Everyone. This is What's the Scoop, episode 6. Glad to have you on tonight. Hope everybody had a nice holiday season, have had a nice Christmas, a nice solstice if you celebrated that, nice Hanukkah celebration earlier. And as obviously just over 24 hours left in the year 2023, there's a lot to look forward to next year, and also a lot of recapping to do over this past year. But we've got a good amount to cover tonight, so I'm very much looking forward to getting into it. We've already got comment from Mr. Keith Brugman. Keith, how you doing, bud? Setting scoops. Keith, I hope you had a very nice holiday, my guy. And excuse me, I hope you were reasonably happy with the outcome of Monday's game, as stressful as it was for no reason whatsoever. But going back to what I was saying, there's been a lot that's happened this past week. There's plenty to get into after what seemed like a bit of a slow period of time for the holidays. Sports has really livened back up recently. It was ironically baseball was seemed like the only one doing anything for a period of time. And my guy Kurt coming in saying, "Scoops, what's up? Happy New Year, pal. Happy New Year to you too, and Happy New Year to Jenny Hoops, and of course to Bella. Hope to have you on one of these weeks, Kurt. Looking forward to it. Good to see you, and glad you tuned in tonight." So this past week, actually, before I get into that, just want to make a brief about next weekend. So I will not be airing episode 7 next weekend. I'll be airing it the week following. I'm not going to be in town next week. I'm not going to be able to air that show. So no What's the Scoop next week, but there will be an episode the following week. So going back to this week, I was actually going to jump in with some Russell Wilson talk based on what was going on there. But some breaking news just came in right before this ended. And I want to give a shout out to my buddy Carson Shear, who's not on this show and hasn't been on yet. Hopefully he will be soon. But Carson, congratulations. The nightmare is over. Your Detroit Pistons are back in the win column. Glad to see that. And hopefully a sign of better things to come. At least as soon as until you guys figure out what you guys are going to be doing going forward. But as of at least right now, you guys are done with that streak and don't have to hear about it anymore for the first time in 2 months. So congratulations on that. But yeah, going back into my original topic, Russell Wilson, for those of you who don't know, there was a bunch of controversy this past week with the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton. It came out that Sean Payton had been, and people in Broncos management had basically told Russ a few weeks ago, it was around the time of the bye week, that if he did not restructure his deal, he was going to be benched, which that was basically concerning guaranteed money regarding injury and such. He did not agree to do so, and the team has gone to Jarrett Stidham, and according to Diana Rossini and many others that have reported it already, it appears that the time for Russell Wilson in Denver is coming to an end. So obviously an unceremonious end to both the Russell Wilson era and the Sean Payton, at least the beginning of the Sean Payton story in Denver. But everyone's covered that ad nauseum. So what I wanted to jump into was a few teams that I think are logical fits for him going into next season. So what I did when breaking this down, I'm not looking at any teams that I believe that mathematically have a significant chance at getting a top pick, because those are going to be the guys that are in on, Caleb Williams, Drake May, and the like. So stayed away from those, because those teams are likely going to be going in that direction. Did not look at any teams that just are already, basically baked into contracts, even if they don't want to be baked into a contract with a quarterback next year, that they pretty much have no flexibility there. So those teams I eliminated, as well as teams that I don't think he would want to go to just for a lack of being able to compete next season. Either these teams didn't have a good enough defense. They've got a lack of weapons, one thing or another. So I came down to a top 3 based on these and other factors, and I'll rattle into that right now. So the first team that I've got as I believe the best fit for Russell Wilson for myriad reasons is the Atlanta Falcons. If the Falcons don't move on from Arthur Smith this offseason, which I don't necessarily think that they should, but if they don't, he's going to be going into a major prove-it year next year, and he doesn't have time to wait around to draft and develop a quarterback for the next coach to win with. Desmond Ridder, as much as I was hopeful on him, has just not panned out for Atlanta, at least not nearly to the extent that they were hoping for and that people like me were hoping for when I was a fan of his coming out of college. Also, off the field, you hear people talk about, especially with quarterbacks, having a quarterback that represents your city. Like people say that, Jalen Hurts, for example, represents Philadelphia well, that Josh Allen represents Buffalo well. Ben Roethlisberger did that with Pittsburgh, et cetera. And I just think that, he's a religious guy. He's pretty, down to earth. He seems like he's a very family guy. With Sierra's always, they're always pictured together and such. So I think from just a personality and cultural standpoint, he would be a good fit there as well. I can see that being something where Atlanta can look at him and say, we buy into this guy. He feels like us, not just a player on our team. So Atlanta's my first team that I'd look at. The other two teams, number 2 was Las Vegas. Las Vegas, I think, should keep Aiden O'Connell as their head coach going into next year. I like what he's done so far. And for the love of God, and I said this last year when I'm blanking on his name, Bisaccia. I said this when they let go of Bisaccia. I didn't understand, for the sake of continuity, why they'd let him go. I didn't expect why you'd let Derek Carr go. Now he's stinking up the joint in New Orleans. But I didn't expect why you'd let him go when he was such a model of consistency in Las Vegas. He was one of the few. He and then Bisaccia were two of the only stable things in that organization when everything else was in utter chaos for about 8 years. Actually, really since Mr. Davis passed away, but specifically over the last several years. And then in turn, they moved off Carr to go with arguably the biggest legitimate question mark. It's as if you're literally putting a question mark at the quarterback position, which would be Jimmy Garoppolo. Again, Garoppolo's a talented player, cannot stay healthy worth anything. I didn't understand that fit at all, especially not in Las Vegas. I think if you're trying to put back a certain level of stability into this organization, a certain level of borderline just ability to just have some sort of a culture buildup and kind of stank out some of the toxicity that's been there for so long. I think he's a good place to start with, as well as keeping O'Connell in there. I think that would send a good message that there's leadership and there's culture and there's as they say, I hate this phrase, but quote unquote adults in the room. So that would be my number 2. And my number 3 pick, this is a bit of a dark horse, but I think that this is going to be a really underrated fit, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers, he's been comfortable with a defensive coach before. He played for Pete Carroll. Mike Tomlin also has a defensive background. Carroll was known as a bit of a player's coach, and he's got the same reputation in Pittsburgh, although there's also a sort of a no BS, mentality that Tomlin, has been, told to be basically preaching in the locker room. Now, for a period of time, it looked like that kind of fell apart a little bit, but if he's looking for a way to kind of rebuild some of that and pass that on eventually to when he steps back, I think Russ is a good way to implement that. Again, a team that doesn't really need much more than a quarterback. Similar to Atlanta, does not need much more than a quarterback for them to be able to be right back into the thick of things, I think. They've got a guy that I really like in Najee Harris. They've got a couple of young players on their offensive line, and they've obviously got Watt and others on the defensive side. They got a lot of good young to just coming into their prime players. And I look, so that would be my number 3 pick. I think that he just, again, going back to he doesn't necessarily fit them culturally from just like a city standpoint, as well as I think he'd fit Atlanta. But I also think that he's familiar from his time with Seattle, he's familiar with that cold weather. He's familiar with having to play in those conditions. Obviously, you're going to be seeing a crap load of that in the AFC North. So someone who's familiar with, when that has to become something that you deal with as a passer, but also how to manage the running game when you're leaning toward that in those conditions. whether it's him or players like Harris in his backfield. I think that makes a good amount of sense as well. So that would be my third pick. I go back to, and I'm not saying this to be funny. I genuinely don't know if he's the kind of guy who comes with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and he kind of wants to stick it a little bit to Denver for the way that they've handled this, which I wouldn't blame him, to be honest. Then Las Vegas could have another, being able to see Denver twice a year. Again, I don't know if that's something that matters to him. I just know it does matter to some players. So that could be a factor for Las Vegas as well. I've been talking over a few comments, so I'm going to bring them into this for a little bit. Scoops, your thoughts on the big Knicks deal? I'm actually going to jump into that in just a few minutes. Kurt, Ritter stinks. Unfortunately, that has been the case. As much as I was excited about him coming into the league. Kurt's agreeing with me on Pittsburgh for Russ. The phrase Kurt's agreeing with me, when's the last time anyone heard that one? Pickett stinks too. Unfortunately, also the case, it seems so far. Feels like that was kind of a match that everyone just expected to happen because of his Pittsburgh background, but not one that seems to have really transferred on the field. Where did you have Washington in this? I didn't have him in these three. I can see that being a fit, definitely. But part of that, I want to see what they do with the coaching position because I think pretty much everyone believes they're moving off Ron Rivera. I want to see if they bring up Bieniemy. I want to see if they completely wipe house and bring in somebody new. I don't know what they really see in Sam Howell right now. I don't know how he fits into their long-term plans after taking him. So that's kind of a bit of a wild card for me right now. So they wouldn't make my top three. But if I kept the list going to 5 or so, I probably would have included them on there. Kurt says, Scoops, I'm going to throw a crazy situation for the Broncos. No way Peyton is going with Stidham for next year. Peyton drafts a first-round QB, hopefully J.J. McCarthy, but he needs to win next year also. Remember who was supposed to be head coach and QB in Miami next year? Yep, Sean Payton and Tom Brady. Brady is perfect quarterback for Peyton's system, plays a year or two, and then rookie takes over. There's no way Stidham is the QB next year. Peyton has something off his sleeve. So that was the rest of where it cut off with the ellipsis there. Again, I've just seen too many signs from Tom Brady that he's very comfortable in retirement. He already gave up his marriage to play when he did. He now has a stake in, I think it actually is the Raiders that he owns a part of now. So I don't even know if he could be allowed to come back without giving that up. Now, maybe he'd be very willing to give that up. But I think that there's probably a condition that says he can't have that and continue to play. So again, something I completely don't see as likely. But again, like you said, I have a hard time believing that Sean Payton, after coaching Drew Brees and then coaching Russell Wilson, albeit not well, is suddenly going to roll with Jarrett Stidham for a full season. I agree with you there that doesn't sound likely. Keith says Russ is from Virginia too. That's a good point, Keith. Could be a factor there if Washington does become a factor. Kurt again saying, whoops, wrong button. Kurt again saying J.J. McCarthy is the guy. He says he is allowed to play. Okay, so that was not something I was aware of. So again, maybe it is a possibility. I would strongly bet against it, but I can't fault a lot of the logic there that you were using. It's just not something that I personally see as something that I could imagine happening, just based on the fact that Brady, when he retired a second time. He said, I'm not doing a long speech because I already used it once before. I'm retiring for good. I don't know. Something about Brady, I just don't think he wants to, even if he did kind of have a slight itch to come back. I don't know. Something about him being a 2 on retirement guy. I don't know. Just doesn't fit in my head, but a lot of things about Brady don't make sense. So who knows? Keith says, plus Brady has a big Fox deal, and we would need to pay him how much to play for the Broncos? Nothing we can afford. And he'll be 47 years old. Yeah, it's just, again, definitely, a fun thing to think about. And, again, crazier things have happened, although I don't know how much crazier. But that would not be something that I would be betting on necessarily. I wouldn't be putting to to channel Joey Clams here, I wouldn't be putting much pizza money on that one. But going and Kurt says, remember Brady put up his best stats ever last year with Tampa. That's very true. Actually, that's a good segue into another topic that I want to talk about, which is just going into next week and the NFL playoffs the following week. Been having, and I'm going to make this short, but I'm so glad to see what Tampa Bay has been doing with a defensive head coach in Bowles. I think he's a good coach, but again, the trend has been going toward offensive coaches. And of course, my guy down there, I've been touting him for years. I think people were sleeping on him. He won a game for Cleveland in the playoffs in Pittsburgh, which nobody could dream of doing 2 years prior. He led them through a good amount of chaos. He tried to play with a screwed up back and shoulder after he had that collision with that safety. I thought that they completely screwed him to basically say, oh, we're going to go and guarantee a bunch of money to the most radioactive quarterback in sports right now, and let you walk out the door. I thought that was a dumb move by Cleveland. And look now, it's their fourth string quarterback who's actually doing well, not him. But Tampa Bay, led by Baker Mayfield, with some of the weapons they have in there, that is not a team. I said a couple days ago it was either this episode of the K&K or the last episode. I talked about Cleveland as a team I wouldn't want to play, and I mentioned on the NFC side, a Detroit being a team I wouldn't want to run into. Right there with them is Tampa Bay. I don't want to run into a chip on his shoulder, something to prove, running on a hot streak, weapons around him. Baker Mayfield. I don't want to be going up against that. That's going to be a much more challenging offense to beat than I think most other offenses you can see in the NFC. And that goes up there with, I think that they can go toe to toe with anybody in the AFC as well when things are going like they've gone the last couple of weeks. And I'm really glad to see it because I was believing in Baker when a lot of people were falling off of him. And, I'm glad to see. And it sounds like there's a mutual interest in a new deal going into potentially a 3 or 4 year range to keep him in Tampa Bay. And I'm, very excited to hopefully see that work out for him and hope that he continues because it's actually kind of funny that a couple years ago the Patriots were one of the other main teams to show interest in him. Well, 2018, one of the other main teams to show interest in him. Back in 2018 in the draft. So for him to become potentially the successor, well, now he is a successor to Tom Brady. For him to do that for more of a long term. After what happened, in New England, that would be kind of funny for me to see. Keith says, Scoops, I'd love to hear your top 3 for NFL MVP. Keith, I want to ask you a clarifying question. Is this who I would vote as my top 3? Or who do I think will be the top 3? I always want to clarify that because I tend to look at these things a lot different than the actual voters do. So I want to know, just clarify that for me if you can, whether you want it as what I think will happen or how I would vote for them. Jody Moncrief says, does Jarrett Stidham scare you? He's played better in the past than people gave him credit for, but scare me? Absolutely not. Again, not a quarterback who I think would be, someone that I'm losing sleep over having to play in a big game. Just doesn't have that built up in his NFL career to this point. And again, things can change. We saw Geno Smith pop out in, year 7, 8, 9 of his career. So it's never too late to pop out, but I'd be very surprised at that point. Okay, he says, thank you for clarifying. Keith says he wants my MVPs. All right. Number 1, hate to say it because I hate the team, but if I'm being objective, it's got to be Christian McCaffrey. I think that Brock Purdy is a decent quarterback and, is a solid quarterback, but he's putting up numbers in a passing league. And I'm meaning McCaffrey, he's putting up numbers that are just absurd. He's been healthy finally, which is for him has been a challenge. And for players in the Shanahan offense in general has been a challenge. So the fact that he's doing this and, overcoming those two things is just And this is a team with a lot of offensive weapons that, get a lot of distribution from Purdy. So the fact that he's, doing this with all of that, it's to me, it's got to be him. Number 2, personally, I'm going A.J. Brown. Again, this is a guy who he has been arguably, other than Tyreek Hill, arguably the most dominant receiver in football this year. And Tyreek is my number 3. And the only reason why I order them that way is because I think that Tua has played so well this year, so consistently, that there's kind of if you look at actual value, I think that there's more of a split in value between those two guys. I think that Hurts a lot of time has had, and I hate to, and I'm going to take a lot of crap for criticizing Hurts, but I think a lot of times Hurts has, I don't want to say he's had a crutch in A.J. Brown, but I think that A.J. Brown has helped him a lot this season, which is not a bad thing. Every good quarterback has a good receiver, but I think Tua's had a better year than Jalen Hurts. So, with all that coming together, I would put A.J. Brown number 2. And then, like I said, Tyreek Hill would be my number 3, just because he's had an absurd season. I remember reading that he was, I don't remember the exact statistic, but he was, all set. He was all set to break, a couple of all-time single season records for receivers, which again, in any offense, even in this day and age with an extra game, still very impressive. You have to tip your hat to that. I know there's going to be a lot of people saying, well, he did it in an extra game. Well, he did it in, an era where, the rules are bent toward passing, which, you could, if you want to make that argument, you can. But I still give him a ton of credit. I think that he's really, and also I think, and this can't be understated, and this actually, I may actually move, now that I'm thinking about it, I may actually move Hill up to number 2 when I say this, because I think a lot of times your value is often shown how the place goes when you leave. And Kansas City has just not been the same team in the speed, receiving, passing. Obviously with Mahomes, he usually can make pretty much anyone look good, but they clearly missed Tyreek, at least recently. If they didn't before, they do now. So I think that might actually, that they're very close to me, Hill and Brown, but that may be a point in Hill's favor, is the fact that Kansas City just does not look the same without him, and that becomes more and more apparent as time goes on. Keith says, I think it makes it tougher for the Chargers to prepare this week. At the same time, I do agree with that. I think the Chargers are just, man, I have been critical of Justin Herbert for the fact that, I keep saying that, year 4, year 5, we should be seeing more from him than we've been. But my God, I talked about how chaotic and how dysfunctional the Raiders were. The Chargers have not been far behind. Just a coach that, I thought was going to, do a lot better for them, just became so dysfunctional on the field. Now they're going through another coaching change. Now they're bringing in a new guy to oversee the roster as they put out Tom Telesco. So I have to have a little more patience than I've had, admittedly, with Justin Herbert for how much he's had to deal with. Although, again, still in my belief, when you have guys like Eckler and Allen and whatnot, I still wanted to see a little bit more than I've seen from him. But I do have a bit of an acknowledgement that I probably was a little bit too harsh on him too early. But he does, I think next year does have to prove, more than he has so far. Matt Staffieto says, stop trying to catch lightning in a bottle, draft and continue to develop the roster. I don't know if that's a general statement or to a specific team. But I don't really disagree with that. Keith says, you have to give Tyreek credit because he's still outperforming his contemporaries. Yeah, that's, again, if I had not been just doing that off my head, I probably would have said him. I probably would have said Hill second. Now that I think about it, and Brown number 3. I don't know. Maybe there was a little bit of recency bias there, just because I've seen Brown play more recently than I've seen Hill. But no, Hill I think is a solid right there, solid for at bare minimum number 3, but yeah, probably number 2 now that I think about it. Trevor Salzman says, hey, Scoops, logical. Okay, so I actually just went over this, Trevor, but to recap what I said, what I was saying earlier. My top three that I was giving were the Atlanta Falcons. The number two was the Las Vegas Raiders. Number three, a bit of a dark horse, I think, for me, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's funny that the Steelers were I thought a dark horse team, and both you and Kurt have said it in the comments now. But yeah, so I think Atlanta, just to me, it fits like a glove because Arthur Smith is going to have to win next year if he wants to, stay beyond next season, if he even makes it to next season. I think he fits the culture of that part of that geographical area very well, and I think that's a thing that matters for at least quarterbacks. I think at least to some teams, and I feel like Atlanta might be one of them. Going back to, and again, like I said before, the three teams that I came up with, it was for a few reasons. I came up with them because of I stayed away from teams that have a shot at top 5 picks or a strong shot at top 5 picks because, again, those are going to be the teams going after Williams, May. They're not going to be looking for a veteran trying to rebuild, not rebuild, but trying to I guess reinvent himself, if you want to put it that way. Number two, and looked at teams because he's going to want to contend. He's not going to want to, in turn, stand around and kind of say, "Oh, I'm going to be on a rebuild for the next 3 or 4 years of my career." So I think he's not going to want to go to teams that have, things like really lacking defenses, poor O lines, not a lot of weapons offensively. So I think Atlanta's a good fit there because I think QB is one of the few things that they do need really, really badly. Unfortunately, because I did like Desmond Ridder coming out of college. And my second team was Las Vegas. I talked about how I thought that was kind of a fit for him potentially being more of a cultural stabilizing force after so much chaos in recent years, after they, for reasons I still don't understand, gave up on Carr to bring in Garoppolo and then kicked out Bisaccia to bring in McDaniel. Just two moves that made no sense to me whatsoever. But again, that's par for the course with the Raiders. So I thought that would be another potential fit. And again, I said, and I don't know how much this matters to him, but if he is a player who kind of says, I want to stick it to the Broncos a little bit, he gets to play him twice a year if he goes to Las Vegas. And number three was Pittsburgh. And I won't go into that too far because it sounds like you agree with me on that. He says, Trevor says, I think that there's a chance that, whoops, I clicked the wrong thing. I think that there's a chance that Fields goes to Atlanta too. A lot of weapons on that Atlanta roster. That's the other team, that's another player that I've heard a good amount of connections with there. And again, that's going to be really interesting to see what they decide to do regarding Fields or making that selection. I mean, it's interesting to me in recent years how many teams who have had a quarterback in place got the top pick and ultimately moved off of that guy to bring in somebody else. We saw it happen with Rosen and Murray. Shameless plug that I called Rosen being a bust before he was drafted, same way I did for Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold. And then I looked, but the last couple of years, I mean, again, Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold is actually another example. So we'll see what happens there. But that's going to be, I think, arguably the biggest question of the offseason is across the league. The Bears really disappointed me because they came in, I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago, but there was 1 year where they came in and just had a boatload of, it was picks, money, caps, all of it, and just had a treasure trove of pieces to put together and kind of rebuild this thing quickly, and it just went absolute nowhere. Matt Eberflus has at least looks like he's getting the defense together a little bit, but whether it's moving on from Fields or moving on from Getsy or moving on from both, I don't know. But something has to change in that Chicago offense. Keith says, who will be the best team that doesn't win their division? Who is the worst team that does win their division? Originally, I was going to say the worst team that wins their division was default going to be the NFC South, but I actually think that if Tampa Bay wins, I think that I said earlier, I think they're legitimately a scary team. God, that is a really hard question. I'm gonna have to come back to that one because that might be the hardest question I've been asked on this show. I'm gonna come back to you in just a second while I think about that, Keith. Kenny says, "Hey, Scoops, can't stay long working. Glad to see you." And Kenny, thank you for taking time to pop in even for a second. Hope your shift is going well. Says Giants are near top because he fits Daboll's system, and releasing Jones post June 1st won't hurt the Giants cap, unlike the Broncos situation. I'm guessing you're referring to Russell Wilson. That wasn't a team that I really looked at as a fit, but obviously it could happen. We've seen a lot crazier things happen in the recent years in the QB market, where for a while QBs were with their team as long as they were any good, were with their team for 10 to 15 years. Nowadays you can make the Super Bowl and you're still on a new team 2 years later. So you never know. Obviously, as a Russell Wilson fan and a not fan, to put it PG, of the New York Giants, I hope that doesn't happen. But we'll see how it goes. And Trevor says Bears got to go Caleb Williams. Being compared to Pat Mahomes isn't something you see every day from a college prospect. Okay, I'm glad you brought that up because I agree with you. However, and this is a general issue I had, and I complained about it on the K&K Sports Show last year regarding the MLB draft, I think it was. Can we stop comparing some of these guys as they come out? These guys are getting drafted 20th overall. He reminds me a little bit of Pedro Martinez. Okay, can we stop before this guy even throws a pitch in organized baseball, or in this case, plays a down in professional football? Why are we saying that these guys? Why are we comparing them to like all-time legends? It's fine to do it once in a blue moon, but it feels like every year I hear at least 2 or 3 players that are compared to all-time greats, and half of these drafts, no one ends up a Pro Bowler, and half the guys are busts. Like I don't understand why the media is so insistent on making these grandiose comparisons on these guys. And then and especially a situation like I'll use the Yankees as an example. We got guys that, people say, oh, you can't trade, one example, I'll give David Garcia. You can't trade David Garcia. He's going to be the next Pedro. And David Garcia was just let go for a bag of kidney beans. Like can we not do this like every single year to every single prospect? Yeah, I don't disagree with you necessarily on that, but it's just, I hear these comps to all-time greats so freaking often in every sport that it kind of dulls my senses to it a little bit, because I feel like they're just thrown around like, penny candy. And, it's hard for me to actually believe, one thing or the other, because it feels like every year they want to put the entire rookie class in Canton before, August. Kenny says Chiefs worst, Rams best. Yeah, I got to be honest, Kenny, I was leaning the Chiefs also. It felt so weird to say, just because of obviously, what they've been the last few years, and betting against them for up until this season has always seemed like a fool's errand, especially with Andy Reid, who, in my opinion, one of the 2 or 3 greatest coaches ever, if not number 1 now. But yeah, they're just not a very good team this year. I mean, they've lost games they shouldn't have lost, and even some of their wins have been less than convincing. They're not getting the same amount of attrition, I guess you'd say, out of their trenches. They're not getting the same play out of their defense. Even Mahomes, and something's going on with me, I think, Mahomes psychologically. And I'm not saying he needs help or anything. That's not my place. I'm just not going down that road. But I'm just saying, I think something is going on in his head while he's playing, because he's just been a very different player in interviews that I've seen, or the clips that I've seen. He's just not the same poised, cool, Joe Montana-ish type of player that he was hailed as 2 or 3 years ago. It just we saw him mouthing off in interviews. We saw him pointing at refs. We saw him yelling in the cameras and one thing or another. Just does not feel like a player who truly believes in either himself or the guys around him, or both. So I don't know what that's about. Maybe they do miss Bieniemy more than we thought that they would. That's something that maybe needs to be talked about. But whatever it is, it's just not the same well-oiled machine that they were for the last several years. And it's shocking to see. But yeah, I think if I had to guess right now, or pick one right now, I probably would say Kansas City. He says Rams best. That's a good pick. I still am going to go with Tampa Bay. But the Rams have come on after a slow start as well, and obviously Puka Nacua has definitely helped with that. One of the better young players this season for sure. Trevor says, "Yeah, I think Williams is elite, but still he is his own player. I agree with you on the player comparisons. Can't compare to many great elite too many great elite players to college prospects who have not played it down in the NFL." Yeah, and again, I saw it in baseball as well. That's the sport I follow probably the most. So that's why I use that as a comp here. But it's just like they treat every I remember it was literally it was the competitive balance round, which that's basically the sort of mini second round of the draft, and they were saying this guy's got shades of, I think it was Sandy Koufax or something, and I'm just like, okay, way to just set this guy up to fail in half of the fans' minds watching this thing. Like, my God. And because that's what's going to happen is, these guys, especially in these bigger markets, New York, as we know, is toxic. And, they're going to come in with these expectations. I mean, they did it to Jason Dominguez a few years ago. He's called, the Martian, and they likened him to, Bo Jackson and Mickey Mantle. Like, can the guy get above AA first? Like, I don't know. I don't want to go off on an elaborate tangent, but it just annoys the crap out of me. Trevor says Mahomes need weapons. Can't just have Kelsey and that's it. I think that's true of any quarterback, and that's another thing. I think that people love to delegitimize certain players' successes just because they had a really good quarterback, or they had a really good receiver, or they had a really good tight end. Like, okay, how are you supposed to win an 11-on-11 game as one player, even if you're a quarterback? Like, I just don't understand. Like, you shouldn't have to put a bunch of JUCO ball players at the offensive line and receiving core for you to believe that a quarterback is great. Like, I don't really buy into that. I have additional respect if you're able to do it without it, but I'm not going to dock you for the fact that you had a great player on your team. I mean, literally every great quarterback that I can think of had either a great receiver or a great tight end at some point. Jody says, same with Wilson. I'm not sure what he's responding to there. But Jody, if you can clarify what you mean, I'll jump in on that. Meanwhile, I know Kurt brought it up earlier, and I don't want to leave him hanging. So I'm going to talk about, I'll jump in on his point because I wanted to talk about the Knicks Raptors trade. So for those who missed it, the Knicks and Raptors made a divisional trade. I'm simultaneously enjoying, but also not enjoying how prominent interdivisional trades have become in sports the last few years. On one hand, I like it because, in my opinion, if you're doing good business, you want the best package from whoever's offering it. You don't care, if it's going to, who it's going to be, because you believe in the guys that you're getting back and you believe in yourself to make the right deal. So in that stance, I like it. But on the other side of things, I don't know. It just feels weird to me to think of like I already ranted about it in a previous episode, so I'm not going to do it again. But that Alex Verdugo Yankees Red Sox trade a few weeks ago, no, let's not make this a thing, because it's not something that I think is something. I don't know. I just don't like seeing big rivals make huge deals. It's like, but again, I get both sides of it. Jody said, need weapons. Yeah. Russell Wilson's another good example. And that's why I said, when I was listing off those teams, that's probably a reason why I would leave off New York, because I just don't think that they've got the weapons that some of the teams that I mentioned can offer, namely Atlanta, Vegas, Pittsburgh. Again, the teams that I picked typically had, at least a couple solid weapons or O-line or defense, like something in that regard. And I just don't think the Giants can match up with those three other teams in terms of a spot where you can plug in Wilson and right off the rip have a pretty solid chance at being able to at least be competitive. I think that the Giants need significantly more than just improving on Daniel Jones. It would help, but I don't think it's going to suddenly take them from a bottom 5 team in the NFC to a top 5 team in the NFC, for example. I mean, look at Denver. I mean, Denver thought that they could do it by bringing him in from, and they had an incredible defense when he first got there, and it went to crap. So I don't know, and I still have questions about Coach Dable as well. So I'm not 100% sure that I would love that as a fit, but. But going back to what I was saying about the Knicks Raptors trade. So to actually talk about the trade itself, RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley went to the Raptors, and coming back was OG Anunoby to the Knicks, along with Precious Ashua, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Malachi Flynn. Excuse me. And there was also a draft pick as well involved. And so this trade, the best way that I can say it is, obviously Anunoby is kind of like the big name, I would say, in this deal, which makes sense. I mean, the Knicks have been wanting to get a big name for a while. They've been, for the longest time, they wanted Donovan Mitchell, they wanted Zion, it's every big name that they want. Because of course it's New York, it's the, mecca of sports, mecca of basketball, yada, yada, yada. So Anunoby, it's someone who comes in and he can guard multiple positions. He's able to add an element of shooting, which I know Kurt was talking on an earlier show about how they need shooters. He's able to, provide, that spacing element that they could use. And he's relatively young as well. So, I'm guessing they're probably projecting a little bit on him as well. I don't think this is a move they're making because they believe that they can, go the distance in 2024. I think that they believe that this is a move that he can be part of, what they believe that they're building. Ashiwa comes in. He's, obviously a good length player. He's a good rebounder. I don't know as much about Malachi Flynn, but I think that for what you guys gave up, I think that's, a solid return. RJ Barrett, again, I think he always was going to be a bit in the shadow of the fact that he was the guy that they ended up with. He was the consolation prize when they didn't get Zion. I know Knicks fans tried to pass it off as, oh, we got Barrett, we're good with this, we're good with this. But everyone and their dog in New York wanted Zion that year and were pissed when they didn't get him for the most part, which makes sense because they talked themselves into getting every single star that, ever existed on Earth, and then don't get 95% of them recently. So I think that this gives them at least off the court. Also, this may give them at least a little bit of, oh, I'm going to look at New York now as a more viable destination if I'm a free agent. Because I don't know how much of that there was the last few years. Maybe Thibodeau hiring him, maybe that was the beginning to that. But I think bringing in someone like Anunoby might, he's a name. And again, as we all know, New York loves, names, if you want to put it that way. So that could also be an angle here, is to try and bring him in, keep him around, and have somebody that players believe that they can go and join with, and not go and like, oh, I'm the guy, and have, a bunch of, random lawn chairs around me. Like, this is somebody I can go and match up with. So that's my guess there. I'm not going to really name a winner of this trade. Because again, I see what both sides were going for here. But I don't know. Again, going back to my original point, it's just weird to me to see division rivals make trades. So I'll be curious to see when the next time the Knicks Raptors match up, which I don't know when that is, but I'll be curious to see when those guys match up, how this trade looks on both sides. Emmanuel Quickley, I know, was a player who, Emmanuel Quickley, I know, was a player who had really come on in the past year or so. Again, haven't watched a ton of him, admittedly, but I know that he's been on an upward trend the past season. So probably was not a player that they loved to give up. And Thibodeau said as much today. He said that, obviously he was not a player that they wanted to lose. But it was basically one of those, once you have a chance to get a guy like Anunoby, that whole thing that we pretty much hear cookie cutter every single time that a player or a team goes out and gets a big player. Keith says, Scoops, once upon a time, my Angels won a World Series. Now they let Ohtani walk. When are my Angels good again? Fix them, please. So Keith, I can foresee in about 40 or 50 years, the commercials where they come on and it's the big bold text on a blue background, and it says, if you followed the Anaheim Angels from 2003 to 2023, you may be entitled to compensation. Because what in the hell is this team doing? And I have the same question about the Boston Red Sox. I'm going to get to them in a second, but I sound like a scolding parrot right now. I'm going to get to you in a second, but I don't know. I don't get what they're doing. I don't get Art Moreno. He was going to do the best thing that he has done for that team in the last 20 years. He was going to sell the team. And then he even screwed that up by saying, no, I'm not going to do that. So I don't know what that was about. I guess he just had to find one other way to piss off the fans that he hadn't yet. But yeah, I don't understand that at all. I thought that having Ohtani and Trout was a great way to start building something, fantastic, and maybe even wrestle LA away from the Dodgers. Because the Dodgers, were in the period of time where they had kind of been spinning their wheels a little bit. They were always in the playoffs, but never winning it. You can argue however you want about whether 2020 was, that was a Mickey Mouse ring or that was a legitimate ring. I'm not getting into that argument. But I thought that was a great time for Anaheim to potentially jump in on things, and it just completely did not happen. They struggled with the bullpen for way too long, getting pitching behind Ohtani. I liked what they did this last year when they went in and they made a push, but I'm looking at it and I'm like, you're doing this now? Like, where was this level of urgency or this level of commitment to the product and to, being more aggressive the last, 3 or 4 years? I'm not saying aggressive, for aggressive sake and making stupid moves, but, some of what I saw in the last year or so, I'm like, where was this energy and where was this, mentality 3 or 4 years ago when it may have actually had more time to build up, catch fire, and turn into something. But obviously, they're in a division with Houston, who ain't going nowhere. The AFC is not, for a period of time, the AFC was really a 2-horse race between Houston and New York, and now other teams are kind of jumping in there. Baltimore has suddenly become very formidable. I don't think that Detroit's going to be terrible forever. I low-key like what Kansas City, my new hometown team, I low-key like what they're doing this offseason a lot. I'm not saying that they're going to be like playoff contenders, but I could see them being this year's version of the Marlins, if you want to call them that. And of course, Tampa always punches above their weight. So yeah, I think Anaheim needs a full reboot, but the question now, of course, is reboot with what? Because their most valuable piece just walked out the door across town, and their second most valuable piece, Trout, first of all, he keeps getting hurt all of a sudden, and then on the backside of that, even if he weren't, they paid him that money, so now he's got, and I don't know if he has a no trade clause, but I'm pretty sure he does. So he can, if he does, he can dictate wherever he wants to go. And he's got that money, and he's got the injuries. So his value compared to where he was 3 or 4 years ago is night and day, and not in a good way. So I don't really know what they would use to rebuild is the thing. I hate to say it, but I feel like they're going into a period of that sort of, I don't want to say mediocrity necessarily, because I feel like that's just an overplayed word. But I feel like they're going to have to go into a period where they're okay, and then they get really bad before they get better, which sucks. But that's what Chicago did. That's what Houston did. That's what Atlanta did. I don't see really another realistic path for Anaheim unless they somehow go out and hit on a lot of, these sort of cheap 1-year minor league free agent guys and catch lightning in a bottle with all of them or most of them. Make a 1-year run Cinderella type of thing. Other than that, I think that's their best thing, is try and get any value that you can off of the pieces that you do have, and just go all in on player development, because I don't see, and they've got to be more. They've had success recently on the international waters. They've got to really play into that success. They've got to double down and really go ham on that. I think that's going to be their key forward, because that is one area where they've been successful is going back to, he hasn't panned out, but going back to getting guys like Maitan several years ago, and then of course Ohtani and such. They gotta play into that, and use what they did to get Ohtani, use what they did to get Maitan, and try and pull some of these younger international amateur guys, and again just do whatever you can to put any resources you can into developing them. Kenny says, Scoop, I think this question would be better for Joey Clams, but your opinion, Dodgers to win NL or the field, not World Series, just NL. I got to go field. Just cause, yeah, I mean, they have a fantastic pitcher in Yamamoto now. They still had to do more than that, I think, on the pitching side. Ohtani is obviously a great bat, but he's not pitching this year. And I think that they need to do, they don't have the same depth in their lineup that they did a couple years ago when, it felt like, where was your, not easy out, but, where was your, for lack of a better word, easy out coming from? Because it was from top to bottom, it was just all-star. And half of them was like, where did this guy come from? Like they were running out guys I'd never heard of and turning them into guys who were hitting, having a 320 OBP and, hitting 15 bombs and like 80 walks. So I'm going to go with the field for the Dodgers for now, just because I think that they, again, this is what I said, and I'm going to use this quote a lot because I used it last week. Congratulations to the Dodgers on winning December, but I care about winning October. And I don't know just yet if just because they made the sexy moves, I think that people got so attached to that. You have to have, it's 26 players that determine whether or not you win a World Series, not just two. Baseball is not like NFL where a great quarterback can, mask deficiencies elsewhere. So again, the Dodgers made a couple of really solid additions. I was upset that New York didn't get either one of them, but at the same time, I think put the rings in LA already, I think is a little bit presumptuous. So yeah, I'm going the field there. Trevor says Angels should have traded Trout and Ohtani 2 years ago. They held on too long, and now it's going to be tough. The Angels are a lot like the Rockies. Yep, I couldn't have said it better myself. Ironically, a few years ago, when I was making a prediction on where Ohtani would sign, when it came out, like what he was looking for and whatnot, my top two predictions in that order were the Angels and the Rockies. So it's just kind of funny that you mentioned those two teams because that was the last time I've heard those two in the same sentence that I can recall. And then, of course, Keith says that those are the two teams that I try to follow. Keith, may God have mercy on your soul. That's all I can say. So that's the last of those comments. Going back to what I was saying about, because I was talking about, I didn't understand, what they were doing in Anaheim, and the Red Sox. I don't get the Red Sox at all. I do not get this franchise at all. And isolate the fact for the next 10 minutes that I'm a Yankees fan. I don't understand signing Lucas Giolito, Now, they didn't sign him to a long-term deal. It's $19 million per year for the next 2 years. So they're not locked into it long-term. But they add Lucas Giolito, who's on a 5 ERA the last 2 years. He was great a few years ago, but he was on a 5 ERA the last 2 years. Then they punt on Chris Sale, send him to Atlanta today, and they bring in Vaughn Grissom, who my guess is they're going to try and, shift Story and him, in some middle infield alignment. But I don't understand this franchise at all. Ever since they let go of Chaim Bloom, who, by the way, I think was a major scapegoat for what I think is an increasingly dysfunctional ownership group of John Henry and company. I don't understand. He was brought in to do two things: to improve the farm and to cut payroll. He did those two things, and now basically John Henry and company tells him to go F himself. I do not understand what they expected him to do that he didn't do, and his thanks is his walking papers. I think that they royally screwed him. I don't understand now again, Craig Breslow, I don't think that was a bad hire. I think that was a solid, if you're going to bring in somebody with no experience, Craig Breslow is not a guy to look at, or not a bad guy to look at, excuse me. But their direction just makes no sense. They let Bogarts go last year, which again, kind of understandable because of the money issue, but then the Mookie Betts trade, which that's going to go down as an all-time failure of a trade because now 2 of the 3 guys that they got back are freaking playing for the Yankees, and the other one, Connor Wong, I don't exactly. I know he's still in Boston. I don't know how he's done the last year or two, but I'm blown away by the fact that the organization just looks so dysfunctional, and I would argue probably looks like they're going to be the bottom dwellers of the AL East for the next few years, because I think every other team has significant reason to be competitive and evidence that they will be. Boston, I look at it and I'm just like, I don't know what the hell you're doing. And at this point, I would honestly just say trade Rafi Devers, eat whatever's left of his contract, trade Rafi Devers, try and get a haul in your prospect side and go that route, because at least they, unlike Anaheim, still have a couple of pieces to move. But just to go out and spend on that type of free agent, not even to go out and spend on a Blake Snell or spend on one of those guys, to spend on Giolito at that level, which again, I know it's not a long-term deal, but that's still a significant amount of money to pay, only to turn around and then trade another starting pitcher for, excuse me, for that, and eat a decent amount of his money too, from what I heard. So I don't understand their side of this at all. They've dumped a good amount of their players the last few years. Obviously, they let Benintendi go. They let Bradley Jr. go. Bogarts I already talked about. They didn't really have long-term guys at catcher or first base. Catcher, they never really could get a long-term figure out of either Vasquez or Swihart. First base, Moreland, they kind of had there for a little bit, but I don't know. Again, I'm really not trying to drag a rival team here. Boston just makes no sense to me right now. And again, at this point, I would probably go with trying to move off of, if you can get something for a starting pitcher, do that, and then move off. Erod also was another one that went to market. So. That's another one. He was arguably, in my opinion, perhaps their most valuable pitcher that they had left. So I would probably just say eat Devers' contract and get as much as you can for him in prospects, and then just do the rebuild thing, because I think that Chaim Bloom left them in a good position, and then they just kind of said, all right, well, we're going to punt on this process and start a different one. Whatever. So good luck to them on that one. My last one, Scoops. This is from Kenny. Give me one move you still want the Yankees to make. I thought about it after your show last week. I think relief pitching makes sense to me. Maybe Hader, but 2 smaller deals. Bring back Robertson for a 3rd time and re-sign Wandy Peralta. Honestly, if you asked me that original question, it probably would look very similar to that, to be honest. I don't know about Robertson. Just because he's not he's not the pitcher that he was a few years ago. Hader, he's going to come with some off the field controversy, unfortunately. So I'm not going to love that, just because, again, we already brought in Verdugo. We just finally got rid of Chapman's nonsense. So I'd be a little bit wary of bringing in Hader, and people were chirping about Josh Donaldson. So if the culture person in me would be a little bit wary of that. But yeah, just in general, if you're looking at a guy like him or Stevenson or Jordan Hicks, I like your idea about bringing back Wandy Peralta. I would honestly, if I were asked right now, do I go starting pitching or relief pitching in terms of my target going forward? I'm probably going relief pitching, because the higher leverage innings are 7 and 8 in that frame. And I think that's where you want your best pitchers to be throwing. And just in this day and age, starting pitchers are just not going 7, 8 innings with regularity anymore, anywhere in baseball in this new era. So, and you can argue whether that's good or bad or whether you like it or not, but it's the reality. So with that, I would probably go toward, beefing up that bullpen, which the Yankees, after not being able to do so worth anything for the first couple of years that I watched them, have done remarkably well the last several years. They always seem to, if they have nothing else, they always seem to have a good bullpen. So that's I would go that route. And if I had to pick one name, probably I'd probably go Jordan Hicks, although Robert Stevenson would be right there with him for me. Excuse me. But love that question, Kenny, and thank you for tuning in. Trevor, all right. I'm going to be wrapping up these questions now because it is 10 o'clock. So I'm going to just get through these last few questions and comments here. Trevor's responding to Keith saying, yeah, that franchise is everywhere as far as making moves. I don't see them winning with AD and LeBron. They don't have enough around them. Keith, we need to make you a Nuggets fan. Another franchise that I don't understand at all. I remember saying that about the Boston Celtics. Basically, apparently any major brand franchise is just baffling me right now. Kenny says, great job on your show, Scoop. Keep up the great work. See you Wednesday. Thank you so much, Kenny. I appreciate that. And Keith saying, Trevor, I grew up watching a lot of Jazz games, but I followed the Nuggets too for a bit. The Allen Iverson era with Melo, awesome. Fun fact, Melo, so obviously Melo played at Syracuse, and growing up in Western New York, I went to a good amount of Syracuse games when I was younger. Did not see him. I started following them after he went out and went to the NBA. But loved going to Syracuse games. Would highly recommend going to Carrier Dome for a game. My favorite player unfortunately passed away. His name was Fab Melo. He was a Celtics draft pick. But man, I love going and watching him play the years that he was here. And with that, not seeing any other questions or comments. Wow, there's 10 people on here right now. Thank you guys so much. That's the most that I've had at a sign off, and I'm very grateful. Thank you. Got one more from Trevor saying the Chauncey Billups era with Melo was even better. The Nuggets would have won the championship in 2009 if they didn't run to a great team. Yeah, I feel like that happens a lot in the NBA more than any other team in recent years. Is just these really good teams just happen to run into the one team that was a little bit better. Fascinating dynamic in NBA. But all right, thank you all so much. I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas time and just holiday season in general. Have a very happy New Year's Eve and Happy New Year, everybody. Obviously, as everyone says, please celebrate responsibly. And very excited for next week, the next 2 weeks, actually, the college football playoffs and title game. I will not be on between now and the title game. So obviously, Roll Tide. Hope that they win this coming week and hope that they can steamroll their way to another title so that I can not look like an idiot for being so high on Milrow. But again, Happy New Year, everybody. And I will see y'all in 2 weeks. Once again, I will not be on the show next week due to my trip. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.